Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the MetaNetTV conversation that you've all been waiting for. We're going to be discussing simplified we're going to be discussing simplified payment verification, SPV, the thing that is kicked around all the time, but seemingly nobody understands and even fewer people are using. I'm joined by Dr. Craig Wright, Chief Scientist at N-Chain. And we have Ari. Ari, how do you say your last name, Ari? Kuqi?
Kuqi.
Kuqi?
Yes.
As an American, I have a lot of Spanish-speaking friends. I'm afraid to say Kuqi in public, but I'm going to go with it.
It's Kuqi, though. Yeah.
Absolutely. So co-founder of LegallyChained.com. We're starting out real professional here. This is great.
All right. We're starting off like 2 hours later than
right.
we all were expected.
Amen. This has all the ingredients for a delicious meal at the end.
Right.
So let's start. Craig, I'm going to ask you the first question. Can you, like, in a 30-second blurb, say what exactly is SPV for the people who don't understand?
Simplified payment verification works by enabling a peer-to-peer entity to basically verify transactions without having to download the entire blockchain.
Beautiful. So, and this would be in contrast to running your own node or all the other things that are more commonplace, that sort of the cypherpunk attitude says is necessary.
Which is the opposite of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is really designed to enable something that works within law, that acts to stop all the problems you had with eCash and other things like that, that acts to stop the illegal nature of some of these systems. And that's the problem. It all goes back to the writings of Lessig. Professor Lessig in the 90s was writing about these topics. For some reason, the cypherpunks in Core and Nick Szabo seems to have not attributed him, but he's the original author of these ideas. Sorry, Mr. Szabo, you're not. He actually had the whole code is law movement back in the 90s that no one remembers.
Fascinating. So it's interesting. I think one of the major things that BSV, the people that kind of became, the quote unquote BSV community, were people that were more cognizant of the importance of doing Bitcoin the way Bitcoin was designed to be done. And therefore, I think SPV is something that's on a lot of people's minds is, okay, here's our development path forward. Here's how we should scale. Here's how light wallets should work. And Ari has made a bit of an infamous name for himself across social media for criticizing what I call the vanguard products of the BSV economy right now. So Moneybutton and Handcash have both received a little bit of some harshness from Ari, given that they are not using SPV while communicating publicly that, hey, this is how Bitcoin's meant to work. These are these beautiful tools, and yet they are not SPV. So Ari, maybe you can elucidate. Could you define your criticism quickly, like a 30-second version of your criticism?
Sure. Well, it's actually like really easy. When what BTC and BCH did, and what basically all these other cryptocurrencies are doing, is making non-mining nodes somehow important in some way. Be it through end users running them on Raspberries, or be it through making it important that every single business is going to run a non-mining full node. With BSV and the original protocol, I don't think that makes sense because blocks are going to be so huge, nobody else than miners will have any incentive to run a full mining node, a node as described in the white paper, because there is no other type of node in the Bitcoin network. So I think it's important to realize that and not build services and applications that rely on a third party that is not properly incentivized to run any kind of node and deliver you any kind of information, because we see the issues with that already with with the current players. We saw that same things happen on BCH prior to this, and I don't see any reason why it would be different on BSV if we go this exact same route.
Right, and I don't think it's without you know, an obvious. I mean, we've seen these things happen. We've seen Money Button has crashed because it ran out of RAM during one of the stress tests, and so I think there's like a. I mean, there's an obvious thing we can point to and say, hey, okay,
well, it's not just a stress test, because then people say, well, those are exemptions. That's not how it'll work when eventually users come. I mean, when you look at like when Twitch enabled following, the same thing happens. Too many users. I mean, I don't know. I never heard that Bitcoin had a scaling issue. Just Money Button has a scaling issue, and the way around that is by using Bitcoin instead of Money Button.
Right. Well, and what is the real issue? As I understand it, it's RAM. That if you're running a full node and you're serving, if let's assume I'm Money Button and I'm serving out to Twitch and to other people, essentially Money Button's node is running out of RAM, and that's the issue in a basic sense. Is that accurate?
If you're asking me, I'm not really that much interested in talking about the technical problems that they have. Those are different for every middleman offering whatever service they are offering, and I have no insight in Money Button's backend or Handcash backend or Canaria backend or whatever they're doing. So I have no idea what their issue is with scaling. Basically, they are having a scaling issue every time that either a measly 200 MB block is mined, and that's so small. Or just usage, actual people trying to use the service or trying to use the applications that are built on these services that break it down. And the same thing happened on BCH every time there was a stress test, every time there was actual usage, every time that miners wanted to show that they could handle these large amounts of transactions and prove to the world that Bitcoin works. It failed because the middlemen fucked it up, basically. And I know that because I was one of those middlemen that was fucking it up. But I wasn't blamed for it because the outside world just blamed big blocks and the miners.
That we're all crazy. This is what they've been warning us about.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right.
And like as a Bitcoiner, I felt kind of bad because I would rather have had like miners furious at my door and trying to get me to implement SPV or do it better, or users being angry about my service not working. But nobody was. They were all busy blaming big blocks and they blaming scaling issues that we were having on the Bitcoin network. And that the same thing is going to happen now. We're going to work for 5 to 10 years and build an economy based on scaling to huge blocks, and those huge blocks will come eventually, and then we will fuck it up and everything will go down because it's successful and because middlemen can't handle it. And I think that's a missed opportunity that I'm not willing to work towards. I think there are a lot of possibilities to prevent that by simply using Bitcoin the way it's described in the white paper and the way Craig basically still describes since then.
Sure. Well, and I think that's the interesting thing about this debate is Craig and Ari, the both of you don't, at least publicly, the public version of what's discussed on SPV, I don't think that there's even a sticking point where you two would disagree, but we've seen some drama between some of the other players. So Craig, I'm wondering if you were to give advice to some of these players, the people that are developing wallets or apps and stuff that are functioning in the SV space, would you tell them to perhaps set things up differently? Are they fundamentally going the wrong direction with their back end stuff, or what solution is there for, let's say, Twitch or Money Button or whoever?
It's a cost benefit issue. At the end of the day, if they want to put it in big servers, they can. I'm not going to stop them. If people want to run nodes and earn money to maintain nodes in other ways, that's their choice. But they don't necessarily need to. So there are other models that don't require that you have complete access to everything instantly. And if you're not talking about worrying about a transaction possibly being double spent in under 2 seconds, then who cares?
Exactly, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand, is that because the Bitcoin network is a small world network, every transaction is at every node within 2 seconds. And if your application is relying solely on the Bitcoin network, then you're just as fast as the Bitcoin network itself. If you're relying on these middlemen, then you're relying on how fast can this middleman process this new block that is mined. Like miners can scale at that size, because otherwise they wouldn't mine that block in the first place. So
Right.
if you're building your application on the Bitcoin network, on the mining network, that means that no block mined will be ever too big and will ever break your application. If you're building that same application on middleman, then you don't have that guarantee, because that middleman doesn't have the same incentive to process that block just as quickly as the miners can. And I think that applications that don't understand how Bitcoin apps should work and should be built are going to have a huge disadvantage eventually to equal apps that are built with SPV in mind and with miner services in mind, because they simply won't be able to compete on reliability and cheapness.
So are the tools there? I guess Craig, like, is there an SDK or something out there? How do we build an app that is natively SPV? Where does one start?
Well, you don't really need tools. You're looking at saving the input transaction and being able to validate that against a series of hashes in a Merkle tree. So there's not tools you need that are different to Bitcoin. You need to actually use the existing system and build something along those lines. So if you take that, you've got all the code to be able to do that in Bitcoin. You can, instead of validating as a miner, you can validate the input transaction when it's handed to you. You need to store the input transaction. So people say, but what if I lose all that information? But then if you store that together with keys, what if you lose your keys? Same scenario.
You'd have to pursue some sort of authority to help you dig it back out, or give you a back door or something, right?
Well, hopefully you've got some sort of easy system where you've got n-lock time to recover after a year, or you have threshold to sort of maybe something to recover keys after a while.
Interesting. And those tools are available. I mean, n-lock time is something that is readily programmed by somebody, let's say, who's developing a point of sale system or something?
Fairly much. It's creating a transaction the way that it was originally envisioned. So not the way that it's currently done. So Core have tried to say that everything needs to be on chain. When you think about this, that means putting all these transactions on chain just for the sake of it. But if I now actually have n-lock time where I don't need to put them on chain, I have a much more powerful system. Instead of having one CLTV option, I can have thousands of possible n-lock time transactions, and I can choose which one I'm going to do. Maybe I can have you sign a transaction to me in a month, and then I can act on it. Maybe I could have you sign 10 different options, and depending on what happens a month from now, I can choose without your interaction which one I send.
It's fascinating, and obviously there's a ton of implications to how to use that commercially. So yeah.
Yeah,
Ari,
I think it's completely right that SPV, like SPV itself, because SPV is just one of the miner services that are possibly going to be offered by miners in the near future or midterm future. There is technically nothing needed for application builders to actually build these apps. The only thing that's needed is a different state of mind and thinking differently about whatever it is that they're building. And I understand that a lot of people are not doing that. We've been trying to do it for over a year now. To build an SPV application, and yes, it's hard, and it requires a different way of thinking, and it's not as straightforward as developers are used to building apps right now. Just grab a couple of APIs from different types of middlemen and throw it all together in a bunch, and then you'll have a working app. But that's something that doesn't scale, and we've seen so often that hits a scaling limit pretty quickly, like 10,000 users, and you're either out, or you're having such large costs in running your backend that it's simply not worth running it. So it's a failure either way. It's a model that we've been trying for 10 years with making Bitcoin a payment system and having it used as a currency, which we failed to do. And now it's basically being repeated. Now that we're trying to attract as much data in general as possible on chain. And the problem will be just bigger, because blocks will be so much bigger. I mean, we would have had terabyte-sized blocks by now if we had won the currency war, so to speak, and we had like one mid-sized country that was using it as a currency or using it as a backend to their currency. But that war is lost, and we're now in the middle of this data war, and the blocks will be so huge. I think even Jimmy would have a hard time loving these blocks and running a non-mining node.
Then again, I would actually argue that we haven't lost the currency war. I mean, you're just too short term. There's no alternative that's won. There's no coin out there that is US dollar coin or Zimbabwe coin or anything like that actually exists.
Sure, that's true. But I think what's become clear is that to win the currency war, there's a lot more needed than was done until now. Volatility is a huge problem. Liquidity is a huge problem. All of these things need solving before being able to truly be able to compete with the fiat currencies. And 10 years ago, it was a lot easier. But like right now, my banking apps are fucking amazing. I mean, I have nothing to complain. I hardly.
Why would we compete with fiat?
That's what I'm saying. There's no reason anymore to compete with fiat, and it's a lot harder to compete.
We're not the same. They're different things. I mean, this is where people go wrong. This is this whole Coder's law anti-state BS that infected Bitcoin. Bitcoin wasn't about that. Bitcoin's an underlying system. It enables micropayments. It does that natively very well. It enables tokens. You can tokenize money. There's nothing wrong with putting US dollars or pounds or euros on top of Bitcoin.
Right. Sure. No, right, exactly, and that's I totally agree with that, and the future is going to be that fiat is going to be built on chain. That is something I'm certain of, and it's not going to be that Bitcoin is going to compete with fiat for being a currency and being directly used as a currency. What my experience has taught me is that people are not willing to use Bitcoin directly as a currency, but they will definitely be willing to use tokenized fiat as a currency issued by the government. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that falls under the category of now being in a stage where we're more focusing on data, any kind of data, like fiat is data put on chain, instead of this anarchist idea of overthrowing fiat and overthrowing government.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, and replacing it all. So rolling back, just to keep us on the SPV point, because we could talk economics and possibilities all day, and I would love to, but I want to make sure people get the SPV dose that they need. In talking with John Southhurst last week, he admitted to me that he assumed that all of these apps were functionally SPV anyways, and it really took the conversations that have bubbled up over the last few weeks to even let him know that, hey, these apps are just served by API and somebody else's node. And I'm curious, two questions. Is there any commercial example of somebody that is using SPV in a way that's valuable? Are they using it in business? And then also, is Electrum or was Electrum ever an example of functional SPV?
No, Electrum and all the other analogous systems have never been SPV. Okay. SPV doesn't require a server.
Exactly. I think the closest thing that came to SPV was the application that Mike Hearn built, the Lighthouse, the crowdfunding application. The P2P part in his crowdfunding application, as in the transaction part, that was something that was not relying on a server. The only part where he had trouble with was it still needed a centralized gallery to work as a crowdfunding website.
Sure.
But like the transactions themselves were as close to SPV as anybody could have gotten, I think, 6 years ago. So I think that's the prime example of something that even transcends a wallet. Being SPV and trying to rely only on the mining network. Now Mike Hearn didn't fully succeed with that because he still needed a centralized gallery. But I think a couple of years later now, we've had enough time to think about it and and technology has moved on. Sure. And I think we're now able to not only build wallets that are SPV or that make use of SPV, but we can actually build pretty sophisticated applications that only rely on the existence of the Bitcoin network. And I think if that's your objective, if you take that as a goal, you will have the best business model for your use case that you can think of. And you will be a reliable and very scalable application, which is what you're supposed to be chasing as a business. But unfortunately, very little people right now are thinking as a business, and they are thinking as projects that may or may not exist next year based on the funding that they got, instead of based on the actual usage and based on the actual revenue that they're generating, because there is no revenue.
Sure. You said
I'm going to interrupt here, and I'm going to say we've got to stop using this word centralized. Bitcoin's not about decentralizing the world. That's a load of bullshit. It's the coder's law BS that people like Vitalik have taken from Lessig in the 90s. Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't build Bitcoin for that reason. It's decentralized so that it's resilient, not so that you have all this, we stop things and whatever else. Centrality, decentralized, whatever else, who cares? Honestly, saying centralized, it's bad. No, it's not. There are cost benefits to each. There's more cost in decentralized systems.
Definitely, and it has
resilience.
Yeah, it has to make sense for the use case, of course. If you're chasing the model where you're only relying on the Bitcoin network, I mean, if your use case requires other parties involved in it, then there basically is no there. It's not an end goal for every type of application. Or
let's take an example for you. If I want to auction my house, it's always going to be centralized.
Of course,
I don't want to go out there and form a peer group to come to an agreement what they think my house should be worth. If you don't like the value, it's too bad.
Right.
I mean, it's very much centralized. If you don't want to pay me what I want, I don't have to sell.
Exactly.
That's centralized. At the end, I dictate to you because I own that property. The end.
Yeah, I understand, and maybe you're right, and using the word centralized is a mistake, because it reminds people of these anarchists that want everything decentralized. decentralized, whatever the fuck that may mean, because I have no.
But
no
do they? I mean, I don't even think they want that. They want control and power.
Yeah.
At
Right.
the end of the day, we're talking about a group of people who run around saying it needs to be free, it needs to be decentralized. I mean, half of them say that they're capitalist, and they quote words right out of Das Kapital by Marx. They have the idea that everyone needs to be equal. They take the purported BS that Gandhi ran around saying everyone needs to stop doing things that involve capitalists and make their own farms and build their own houses and grow their own wheat and then die.
No, exactly, and it shouldn't be. You're right. We shouldn't talk about centralization or decentralization. It's more about is your service scalable? Is your service reliable? Is your service cheap? And is your service fast? And
is it
if you can
profitable?
do that on a single server, great.
Right.
And if you can make it resilient, great.
Right.
But the chances are you have a single point of failure. So how are you going to mitigate that?
Exactly. That's exactly the point. Like for some use cases, it doesn't make sense to not have any centralized server involved in it. But if you can stay away from it, it's not about centralization or decentralization. It's about having a product or a service that's actually scalable and that's actually reliable. And that has to do with thinking like a business and making a business plan and making a risk analysis instead of thinking like a developer and thinking code is law and thinking I need decentralization in my app because that's what we do in crypto.
So then let's discuss, like, does this apply? So Paymail and BIP270 are some of the responses we've seen now. Is, well, we're decentralized. We're sort of using SPV in these systems now. And Ari, you've criticized both Paymail and BIP270 as essentially being a pseudo centralized system in between. Basically, you're giving handles to the world, actually, or is it? Go ahead.
I haven't said anything about BIP270, mostly because I didn't want to mention what alternative there is.
Sure.
But I did mention Paymail, and but the issue that I have with the whole setup of minor ID Paymail and BIP270 and using that to build to build SPV applications is that Paymail is a centralized handle system that resides on somebody's server. So it's not P2P. So if you're building the simplest example of an application on Bitcoin, which is a wallet, and you're using Paymail for that, then you can't really say that your application is P2P or that it's SPV, because it's using a centralized handle system. And sure, you can say, but everybody can run their own Paymail server. So if you really want to make it P2P, you can just run your own Paymail server, and your friend can run his own Paymail server, and then we can send each other money to each other's Paymail server. But that's not how the real world works, because just like with email service, nobody runs their own email service. Businesses run their email server, and most end users use whatever the businesses are offering, like Gmail or in your case, Proton Mail, which then gets filtered out out of people's inboxes. And the same thing is going to happen with Paymail eventually, I think, because I don't think it's the right solution to work towards SPV. With regards to an identity system, because there is an identity system needed. There is something needed that makes identifying users easier than right now. But I don't think Paymail is the right answer to that. And again, like if people think that is the right answer, more power to you. Please continue doing whatever you're doing. And we'll show you that we can do it better.
Wow, okay. Amen to that, Ari. Craig, what are your thoughts on Paymail generally, or these sort of handle systems? I like them. I think they're functional and beautiful, but is it Is it the right direction, or does it put a little
I
too
think
much?
this is early days. At the end of all this, it's going to be whoever provides the best service, what customers want, etc. I'm not going to get in there and start saying X is better than Y or whatever else, for the simple fact that my role is to make the plumbing. And
Sure.
I'm not going to comment on whether you have hot water or cold water, or mix them together, or have a spa or dishwasher or whatever else. I don't care, as long as you use my plumbing.
Sure.
Right, and this is why I like Craig, because like Craig knows very well to stick to his role and not engage with people and that have nothing to do with what his job is in the network. And I think we all need to learn to stick to our role and to do what the Bitcoin design allows us to do, and to scale it that way, and to just keep to the white paper and keep to what Satoshi told us to do and how to scale, because he showed that it was possible in the past. We seem to have forgotten about it.
All right. Collectively, we all forgot everything, which apparently is a human trait. But
I don't know if we forgot it. I think most people haven't read my paper.
all right. Yeah. It's like Christians. It's like Christians who claim they've read the Bible, right? Like, oh yeah, and, you know.
I looked at the cover.
Right, exactly. So here's an interesting.
I still read it like once in a while, because it's still like it still provides with insights in different contexts in which you're in. So if you're dealing with an issue that has to do with Bitcoin, to just read the white paper again and think of that issue that you're working on, because the chances are pretty big that the answer is just like right there, staring you in the face, and just you're like not seeing it.
Well, it's not even a difficult read. Somebody who is functionally literate in the English language could burn through it maybe even 2 or 3 times in a half an hour,
reading
right?
Is something different than understanding, of course.
Sure. And
yeah, well, I don't know if people understand it terribly well. I'm going to buy dictionaries for everyone. I mean, I keep arguing this. Like, people run around going, "Oh, we can set whatever rules we want." No, you can't. The last line of the Bitcoin white paper is literally any needed rules and incentives can be enforced with this consensus mechanism. That's not set. That's not created. Enforced. You vote with your CPU power, expressing acceptance of valid blocks. That doesn't mean you change the rules. It means you look at the rules and you enforce them. Policemen don't make rules. Policemen, well, in honest countries, there are some countries where policemen make rules, but in countries that you'd like to live in, policemen don't take bribes, they don't change rules, they enforce the rules that they're told. That's the nature of a good, honest society. And that's what nodes do. They don't dictate who owns property, they follow rules.
Right, and by nodes, just to clarify, by nodes you mean the nodes that are defined in the white paper, right? There are
Section 5,
right.
Bitcoin miners. They put transactions into a block. They don't just sit there and validate their own. They accept blocks by actually creating sort of a hash puzzle, and they build on those. So, sorry, Raspberry Pis are not miners. Not nodes.
So here's a question that I've not heard asked. We talk about miner governance, that sort of thing, like the role of a miner versus the role of a developer. And developers are, business opportunists that are showing up to try to provide value, and they're working. Actually, most typically, if we look at the long history of Bitcoin, in opposition to miners, sort of villainizing. But both of you gentlemen are both. You're in leadership roles of companies that are involved in both development and mining. So I'm curious, as far as SPV is concerned, how does that step get taken? Who needs to provide the leadership and build those paths? Ari, I know you're building an SPV solution, and Craig, given everything you're up to. I'm sure you've got all kinds of things brewing in the background. But is it the miners or is it the developers? And given that you're
Neither.
both,
They follow rules. They don't set them.
sure.
The rules of the system are set in stone. That simple. Any needed rules are not what people out there, developers, say, oh, we can implement. Rules incorporate societal bounds as a soft cap and law. Law is a subset of rules. People don't seem to understand that rules are basically laws and how they're interpreted. That's what rules mean.
Right. So you can the thing that you have to do is try to build things in which you are putting the miner or the Bitcoin network in the position of enforcing some rule, some law, some whatever agreement between people, and having the Bitcoin network as the settler, the enforcer of these rules. And basically, I think that's why it's important to recognize the role of miners and try to incentivize them to offer more services and enforce more rules, so that we eventually end up with a very small government, because then the government will have very little rules to enforce themselves, because it's not needed anymore.
Well, they'll still have lots of things. Bitcoin
Sure,
mining
but
doesn't
just not-
stop people
just not- Sure.
murdering.
I'm not saying there is no government. I'm just saying the government is very small. So like
More
we have
limited, hopefully,
very big
than it is
banks
now.
and very small government.
Yeah.
Limitations would be good, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, Ari, with miners providing services, like what services as an app developer, a wallet developer, would you like to see miners providing? What would be something helpful for you to hear, on a Monday morning in the next 6 months that allows your life to get easier from the mining space here?
I'm not waiting anymore. I mean, we've been trying for months and weeks on end to get miners to play ball, but mining pools are socialists. They are not acting like the miners that I'm picturing in the future. So we're just building the solutions ourselves, and we'll show what we think should be done. And yeah, so I'm not really interested in exactly explaining what services.
Sure.
SPV proofs, Merkle proofs is like the basic thing that a miner can do and reliably offer to application builders, to at least have wallet operators or wallets operate in a way that's scalable above 10,000 users without the additional cost on a server.
Sure. Well, I think we should probably wrap up. I wanted to keep this one focused. I'd really love this video to be the vanguard of SPV explanations that people can reference for years to come. So if you were to both pick one thing that you think is the most misunderstood or the most poorly applied, what would that be? How can people learn something new about SPV that perhaps they've never heard or that they've been understanding wrong thus far? Craig, we'll start with you, please.
Okay, to start, you need to stop this idea that you mistrust miners. Miners are competitive and they're bound by law. If they do something wrong, they're going to lose. At the end of the day, we've seen in many situations in the past where miners find invalid blocks, every other miner rejects them. It's a protocol that is enabling a zero-sum game that allows all other miners basically to pick on the miner who makes a mistake, and they lose. So we've got to start thinking that we can actually trust this chain of hashes and say that that is the real history. We don't need to worry about collisions. We don't need to worry about, oh, big bad government did whatever, because it doesn't matter. If you have a home node, you don't do anything. if someone updates BTC, for instance, and seizes, well, drug money, then so what? You can't stop it with your home node.
Right.
Unless you've got one of these big, powerful mining companies, then you're useless. Find out that that's the truth and get over it.
Sure. Beautiful. Ari, what's something that you think? What do you wish people would learn ASAP?
Well, I can't do anything actually than just agree with Craig on this, that the most important thing that people really need to learn is that there is zero incentive for anybody but miners to run a full node, and a full node is including mining. And if you're not mining, you're just holding an archive of information that's
Right.
useless to you. And at big blocks, that just won't be economically feasible. So I think it's important to have clear that Satoshi's vision definitely allows for the middleman approach, and that may work depending on how much you're willing to invest in the infrastructure that you're building. But you will not be able to keep up with the mining network, and so it is disincentivized in the long term, because miner services will be cheaper, faster, and more reliable than anything that a middleman can offer. Because a miner will not mine a block if he can't process it. So in the case of also offering miner services like providing Milker proofs or on-chain identity or whatever a miner may be specialized in, he will not mine a block that would disrupt the services that he's offering, because that costs him money, bottom line. And if there's real demand, he'll invest in the infrastructure and mine them, or he sells his business to a miner that's willing to do more work. So I think this is how we eventually get to a really professional and reliable network, where everybody can build on and where everybody can have their roles, their rules enforced, including government, including private parties. And I think using Bitcoin properly, using SPV, and using miner services will give you a competitive advantage if your product is valued by your customers, if it's actually used by your customers, because it gives you unbounded scale at very low cost. It requires you as a developer to think a little bit different than you're doing right now, which we hope we can accomplish by setting the right example technically. But this is primarily a people's problem, and Bitcoin will only succeed the best if it can solve these people problems, because it's not a technical problem. There is technically nothing needed or impossible about this whole design. It's just about people not understanding it, and people thinking the wrong way about what the network is and what it can provide. And I think it's important to realize the role of the miners, so that we can use Bitcoin properly and we can improve the human condition as best as possible, using Bitcoin as a tool for that. And Bitcoin will definitely, either way, Bitcoin will improve people's lives and will go the most efficient route. The question is just how quickly can we get there, and it'll take longer if application developers keep on building on middlemen, because then it'll take 10 years for them to break down, and then it'll take another 10 years to rebuild everything. So yeah.
Sure. All right, beautiful. Any other closing thoughts? Craig, I'd like to give you the opportunity if you'd like.
No, it really comes down to actually thinking about how Bitcoin can be a peer system, not user to mesh to user.
Right.
Very simple. How can you send something to another party and then let them send off to the network to settle after that?
Yeah. Amen. All right. I want to thank you both, gentlemen. I really hope this has been a valuable conversation. I certainly learned more than I thought I would. So this is great.
Okay.
Absolutely. So anybody watching, thank you for tuning into MetaNetTV. This is available at first on Streamanity and then ultimately, I believe, moving to YouTube. But it's been a pleasure. I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. Saying thank you once again to Ari Kuqi from legallychain.com and Dr. Craig Wright from EndChain. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.